Welcome to this course where I will show you how you can create cinematic animations in Blender from start to finish. We will create this animation, including some variations of it, and I will share all my tips and tricks I learned over the last few years doing this along the way. In total, there will be 7 episodes and I will post a new one every day, so make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to not miss them. So actually this course is already 1.5 years old, and it was a paid course for I think $28 or like $30-$40 on Motion Designer Academy. But the Motion Designer Academy website doesn't exist anymore, and so the course was just sitting around in my folder for the past few months. So the course is already over 1.5 years old and you can't get it anywhere else. I decided to post it here on YouTube for free. So to everyone who already bought it, I'm super grateful for you, for your support, and I hope the 2-year head start was worth it for you. And for everyone else, I also hope that you can learn a lot in this course. And yeah, if I talk about something like Motion Designer Academy or a paid course or whatever, just ignore that. And yeah, maybe also the Blender version might be an older one, but all of the knowledge I share is still up to date today, and there are a lot of valuable stuff I teach in this course. So I hope you will enjoy. If you have any questions, make sure to comment down below or join my free Discord server with over 2,500 active members, where you can get feedback on your art, can get help, and we also host monthly challenges to improve your skills. I hope you can enjoy, and let's get started with the introduction and the first episode. My name is Florin Flammer and I'm a 3D artist. I started out over 4 years ago and I specialize in cinematic 3D animations. Over the years I have worked on some amazing projects for big music artists and brands, gaining extensive experience in 3D but also on the business side of it. I will teach you what took me years and hundreds of tutorials to learn, all in this course. First, we'll go over the creative process, discussing how to overcome a creative block and generate the most creative ideas. Then we will create this cinematic animation together step by step. While doing this, I will show you my process, guiding you on how to handle large Blender scenes and also perform some post-process work on it. In the end, I will also discuss the business side of freelancing in the industry, and I will provide you with tips and tricks how you can attract your first clients and improve your income in 3D. By the end, you will have your own unique animation. And by the way, if you're a beginner, don't worry, I will go over everything step by step. So if you want to take your 3D animations to the next level, this is the course for you. In this first episode, I want to talk about the basics and the creative process that go into creating a professional cinematic 3D animation. I will take you step by step with me through this process, so let's get to it. So first of all, we need to get an idea, but before you can get an idea, you need to figure out the following 3 things. The first thing to figure out is if you already have inspiration, or do you have some guidelines from a client or a mood board or whatever. Then the second point is if it can be achieved on your PC or laptop. So if you have a really crazy idea, you also have to think about that part, because else you're gonna start and then it's not possible and you get frustrated. So also make sure to think about that. And in the beginning, it might be a little bit harder to guess what you can do with your PC or not, but you will get better at it. And I will also give you some tips and tricks how you can improve that skill. So yes, but still, that's also something to think about. And then the third thing is in what general direction or medium you want to go. Do you want to create a cinematic animation for YouTube in 16:9, or do you want to create a viral TikTok or reel, or is it for a product animation, an ad or whatever? But just figure that out so you know the general direction. After you know these 3 things, you can start thinking about the idea. This is very individual, so it might be a little bit different for you, but I can share what works for me and how I can come up with some creative ideas and what you can do if you have a creative block or don't know any further. First of all, try to create a general mood board or a reference board to gather all your inspiration you have for this piece. I like to use a program called PureRef. With that, you can just drag different images together that fit this project or that inspired you, and in my opinion, you should not look for the perfect inspiration that you can copy one by one, but rather you should be looking for color combinations that you like and also want to have, or like a composition that inspired you, or like just a general style you want to achieve in your piece. This mood board can be really rough and it doesn't need to be perfect or anything, but it's just here to guide you through the process so that the animation in the end is more consistent. Maybe you have also experienced this, but I had it a few times that I had a great idea, but in the end the animation looked way different. Maybe it wasn't really bad, but if I had done a mood board back then, it would have just helped me to visualize what I have in mind a little bit better, so the final output that I generate, like the animation, is more consistent and matches up with what I had in mind in the beginning. And maybe also worth mentioning, if you work for a client or you work in a team, this mood board or this art guide might already be there, so you don't have to create it by your own. Now it's time for your imagination. Take your time, think about a shot you want to create or the character that will be in it or the environment. And yeah, just think about it until you have a solid idea in mind. This is the most fun part for me because I can unleash my whole creativity, but sometimes it's also easier said than to actually think about something, and it can be really difficult. And that's what most people call a creative block, when you just can't get a better idea or any idea at all. So I just want to share some tips how I can overcome a creative block. And yeah, just what helps me in that situation. So to overcome a creative block, or if you already have an idea but you aren't satisfied with it and you can't think of anything else, look for boredom. I know this sounds super uninteresting, but it's proven that a human can be most creative when he's bored. I 100% agree with that, and also have many examples how that worked for me to get a new creative idea. But very important, you don't have to lock yourself into your room for 8 hours and stare at the wall or whatever, but I just want to encourage you to take a walk for an hour, or maybe drive your bicycle, or go earlier to bed and think about it before you sleep. And yeah, there are many different ways you can like just cut out a few hours from your day, or maybe a few minutes, however long you take to get the idea. And yes, it really works, so I can 100% suggest. But whatever you do, make sure to keep your phone away and every other distraction. So then when you're at your favorite silent place, because your brain also doesn't like to be bored, so it will give you some cool ideas and suddenly the ideas will pop into your head. And honestly, I don't really know how it works, but it just works for me. So I want to encourage you, make sure to try that out if you have a creative block. Another thing I hear a lot is to look for inspiration when you have a creative block. But in my experience, it doesn't help me to look at inspiration to find my own idea. But I think inspiration is very important, and you should always look for inspiration before or throughout your life in general. But to find an actual idea or your own original creative idea, like I already said, go to a calm, silent place or take a walk and let the ideas come to your mind. And with that, you can get interesting but also your own original ideas that might be inspired by something you saw a few weeks ago, but it's still like your own idea because you don't just saw something and thought it's cool and I want to copy that, but you had it for like you had the idea on your own. And also at that point, like the idea doesn't have to be 100% thought out in your head or 100% perfect, but yes, it just have to be like a rough initial idea that we can make further exploration on. So now we're at the point where you have the idea, and now it's really important to write it down. I don't know how many times I had an idea when I laid in bed and then I didn't wrote it down and then forgot again. Honestly, I don't want to know, but yeah, just write the idea down so you can also make your mind free to think about new things and you don't forget it. And yes, so make sure to write it down. So then once you write it down, maybe a few hours later or a few days later when you have some time, if you're good at sketching or drawing, make sure to sketch it out, maybe make a little sketchboard or whatever. Or if you're not really good at drawing like myself, you can also roughly block out the scene in Blender. We'll go over that in the next episode how I do it, but yes, you can just roughly block it out, maybe place a camera in the scene, line up a rough composition, but that just helps me to refine the idea more or see what's actually possible in the real world, because sometimes our ideas are not really possible in the physical world or in the 3D software, So yes, that just helps me, but this shouldn't take more than an hour or half an hour. It's just like a really rough blockout to, yes, refine the idea more in your head. So the last thing that really helps me before we actually start to create the animation is to have a big checklist with everything I usually do in my animations. This especially helps with big projects or projects that span over a longer amount of time, and it's just to make sure that you don't forget anything. Like, even if it's just a simple render setting you forgot, it can cost you huge amount of render time or of actual time you could spend working on other projects. Or if it's an idea you had but you have to wait until later until you can implement it, it just helps you to keep some structure in your project. So I already have a general checklist template that I use with the most important things I do on every render. And you can use that too. You can download it for free from a Google Drive link I attach, or I attach the file directly, I'm not sure yet. But yes, just copy it for yourself, and maybe you want to do some adjustment or some tweaks that work for you. And yes, just add your own stuff to it. With these last 2 points, with the blocking out and the checklist and everything, we were already at the beginning of creating our scene, but that's for the next episode. This episode was very theoretical, but it was an important foundation to create our animation. But in the next episode we will get practical and actually start to create our animations step by step. So I'm really looking forward to it, so see you there in episode number 2. Welcome back to the second episode. In this episode we will get practical and start on our animation. But first, let me give you a quick overview on how I normally approach such a project. We now already have the mood board and a general idea of what we want to do. So from that point, here is what I normally do to be as efficient as possible. The first step is to block out everything. This is to get a rough idea of the scale, of the camera framing, and of the whole 3D scene in general. As already mentioned in the last episode, it also helps to develop the initial idea further. Then the second step is to do the rough animation, especially for the camera, to figure out the shot. This is important to do this early because then we know for the rest of the project what will be seen by the camera and what not, which will again spare us much time and much work because we don't have to focus on unnecessary parts of the scene because they don't get seen by the camera anyway. Then the third step is to replace all our cubes we created in the blockout stage with our actual assets. This is a super fun part and feels like playing with Lego, but at this stage make sure to not lose time in the details. The next step is texturing and lighting. At this stage we go to the rendering mode for the first time, and most assets probably come with textures, but we might have to adjust them or add some texture to stuff that is not textured yet. And we also add an HDRI and if necessary some initial lights and or maybe a fog. And the goal of this step is to set the general mood and look for the scene. Next, let's finally add all the important details. This can be some cars or humans in the distance or some mist between the buildings and much more. At this step you can lose a lot of time, so you have to balance it so that you have as many details as possible with not losing too much time. Then we're gonna refine the animation. Then for the next step we just fine-tune or add little animations to give it some extra details. For example, we can add a slight camera shake or animate some birds in the distance or whatever we have in our scene. This step is just to bring the whole world to life. Then the next step is rendering. When we are pleased with our scene, we can render it out. Depending on the animation, we can add some adjustments in the compositing nodes or render on different layers. Then the last step is to do some post-processing. With everything rendered out, we can import it into our post-processing program, something like After Effects or something other, and give it the finishing touch like some color grading, some grain, some lens flare, maybe lens distortion, and you know it all, like the compositing stuff. These 8 steps are not written in stone and they might vary from person to person or from project to project, but it's just something I generally follow because it helps me to be as efficient as possible and not to waste any times on unnecessary details. So let's get to the first step, the blocking out of the scene. Make sure to download my startup file so you have all the same settings as me. If you want, you can also set it up as your own startup file. If you open it up and then go under File and then here under defaults you can select save as startup file. Once you have everything set up, let's start. So the idea is to have some kind of glass building at the top, a character that jumps down, and a city below. What I like to use is this cube tool over here. With that, you can really quickly and easily add cubes. So let's add one to the top of the building and a few for the city. Okay, now let's add in the camera. To move the camera, I like to use the fly mode. If you have my startup file, you can access it once you're in the camera by pressing Ctrl F. Now we can fly around with WASD like in a game. Let's place the camera below the building. Now let's add in some more cubes to get a better understanding of the framing. I like to add larger buildings to the side to create a natural vignette effect for our character and create a more interesting composition. You can also copy and scale the cubes around to add some additional buildings. Now let's go to the camera and let's scroll down to the camera settings. And in there, let's open the viewport display. Here I like to put the pause per 2 to 1 so we don't get distracted by anything outside of the frame. Let's add all of our cubes in the background into a collection by selecting them all and pressing M on the keyboard, and let's call it City. And let's also add the one cube in the foreground to a collection, and let's call it Foreground. Now I just duplicate some of the cubes and move them to the back to make the city even larger. Let's also add in a cylinder for our character that is roughly its size. For example, 1.8 meter height with a radius of 0.3 meters. And now we can see that our cubes are way too small for actual buildings. So let's scale them up until it works with our real life scale character. Let's move everything in place again and we are good to go. Let's get our attention back to the camera because there are two more important things we want to fix right now from the beginning. The first one is the aspect ratio and the focal length, and the second one is the rough animation. First, let's choose our aspect ratio, which will be 16:9 for me, but you can also use a more cinematic aspect ratio like 21:9, or the shot we are gonna create will also work perfectly for Reels and TikTok, so you can also choose 9:16. Then Google the pixel size you need for that format, and you can also scale it up with this percentual slider. So for example, I can put in 1920 to 1080, and then if I want 4K, I can just put in 200%. But now for the focal length, I think for this one a bit more wide angle could look good, so let's set it to something like 28mm, and then let's create a good looking composition again. Here it helps to activate the composition guides in the camera settings. Let's activate the golden ratio because I think that might work well, and let's line everything up. Let's also fill out the newly created blank spaces between the buildings with some more duplicated cubes and move them around. Next, let's think of a camera animation. I like to keep it slow and grounded to give it the cinematic feel the movie Dune, for example, captures really well. So one option would be just a slow backwards move. Let's go to the animation tab here on top and let's try them out with some simple keyframes. In the graphs editor, let's press the keyboard key T and select linear for now, so the animation is all the same speed and we don't have to deal with the curves until later. Let's change the speed to around 5 seconds and add a new keyframe on frame 1. Now we have a subtle animation. By the way, I used 24 frames per second to also give it an extra cinematic feel because that's what most cinema cameras use, and 5 seconds is just 5 times 24 frames, which is around 120 frames. I also want to add another shot before this one. I imagine a close-up of the character jumping away from the glass where it all goes into slow motion. So let's rename and copy our initial camera and set up the shot. For that, the camera we created first, let's call it shot 2, and the camera we just duplicated, let's call it shot 1. On the shot 2, let's increase our timeline or like total frames by another 3 seconds, and let's move the keyframes of the second shot to the back so we have the first 3 seconds to work with our first camera. Now by pressing on this green icon we can view it through our new camera and change the active camera in the scene. Let's also give the character a simple animation to estimate the whole shot a little bit better. I want the character go out of the first frame really fast, and then when it comes into the second shot, I want it to come in fast but then slow down into slow motion. Next, let's delete all our keyframes on the duplicated camera on shot 1, and let's move it in place a lot more closer. I think it will look cool if we rotate it a little bit, and I also want this to be a little more close up, so let's change the focal length to 85mm. Let's try it out with adding a keyframe on the first frame and then move out, rotate it a bit, and add another one on frame 72. So we have around 3 seconds. Okay, this looks interesting. It's still kind of hard to imagine, but once we have some glass destruction there, which will turn into slow motion, it will look good. What we can do to give it even more of a slow motion feel is to speed up the animation at the beginning. Remember, this still looks trashy because we are still at a very rough blockout stage. It's just to experiment and see how it looks. I also think these two shots could work great together because we have a continuation of motion and movement in the two shots. Both moves go outwards and we also play with the slow motion. Let's rewatch it and switch the camera at the right moment so we can see it side by side. Okay, I think this works for now for the blockout stage. We will make it look smooth and clean in episode 4 when we refine and add all the animations. But for now, that's it with the first episode and with the blockout stage. I hope you could learn something along the way, and the next episode is gonna get real interesting because we're gonna replace all these cubes with actual buildings and build our world. See you there! Welcome back to the third episode. In this lesson, we will actually build the whole environment and create our own world. We will replace all the boring cubes with high quality building assets, and in the end we're even gonna create the foreground from scratch. First, let's prepare our assets. For that, we're gonna use some free buildings from Kitbash 3D. But I want to encourage you that if you already own building assets, or if you want to download your own, for example, Max Hay has a really cool free package of buildings, feel free to do that because it doesn't matter what kind of buildings you use, and I think it's awesome if every animation looks a bit different in the end. Also, just a quick disclaimer, the Kitbash assets can take some computer resources, so if you have an old PC or laptop, you could run into difficulties later. In that case, I would also suggest to you to use your own building assets that maybe take up a little bit less computer resources, or look online for some buildings with a lower poly count. But don't worry, if you have any gaming PC or even laptop from the last 5 years, or probably even more, I'm not really sure because I haven't actually tested it, but I think it should be good. If you realize it later in the course that your PC can't handle it, you can always replace the assets, so that's no problem. So now you can import your buildings. If you want to use the free buildings from Kitbash like I do, let's first download Cargo from Kitbash to unlock all the free buildings. Let's install the software. And the plugin, I have the link in the description, and for that double click the downloaded file and click through the initial process. Then register or log in into Cargo. Now if we go to models and then filter for free, we have some amazing free assets. Let's just download a bunch of them. I suggest that you switch to 1K textures because we are not going to notice the difference anyway, because the buildings are in the background and we can spare some graphic card resources we're going to need later. Now we can just click on import and we have the building in our scene. Let's put it into our new collection and let's just import the other buildings real quick. Once we have all the building in our scene, let's rename our initial city collection with all the blocks and rename it to blockout collection. And then move all the buildings we just imported into a new city collection by pressing the key M and create a new collection. Now with everything in Blender, we can start moving them in place and rotating them around. So the goal is to kind of match it with the cubes, because for that we already we created the composition with the cube, but of course not all our buildings will fit exactly, but that's not a problem. By the way, if you use the Kitbash buildings, make sure to use the empty around because otherwise it can get screwed up later. We can also duplicate our assets, but I suggest to use Alt D instead of Shift D, because then it will create an instance of the building and it's just way better to optimize our scene. But keep in mind, if you create an instance and then move the original of the instance, it also moves because it's linked. So yes, just keep that in mind. Or if 2 buildings moves at a time, that's probably the reason. Let's fill up our scene until it looks right. I also turn the blockout collection on and off and see how it looks and how it compares to our initial composition. If something isn't visible anymore, make sure to set the clip end on the camera to something like 10,000 meter, and also in the viewport, because Blender clips everything beyond 1000 meter by default. This probably takes you a little bit longer than we just discussed now in this episode, but just take your time until you feel the world works for you. You can see I also duplicated some of the larger buildings and rotated them, so I just can fill out everything and there is no blank spaces where you can see through the whole city. And yes, now let's choose a cool HDRI from Polyhaven, and I like to use the HDRI add-ons to import them, because then you can easily switch between them until you like it. I attached the download link to this add-on and you can install it like a normal add-on. And once you install the add-on, download some HDRIs you like and then move them to a specific location. I created like an asset folder where I have an HDRI folder and I store all my HDRIs there. Now we have the zip file of the add-on in our downloads folder, and we have the HDRIs in a specific HDRIs folder we just created. Now let's also move the zip file somewhere safe. I also have an add-on folder for that, but that's really up to you. And then go to Blender and go to Preferences, and then under Add-ons, click on Install and select the zip file and install it. Now we just have to activate the add-on with this checkbox and you're done. Let's go to the Easy HDRI add-on, which you should see here on the side. And let's select the folder where you saved your HDRIs. Now we just have to click on Create World Nodes and it created our HDRI setup. Now we can choose an HDRI we like, and I will go with this one for now. And again, feel free to use a different one if you like another one better, because it just gives you a unique animation in the end. And you also don't have to be 100% sure, because we will probably going to replace it later when we add all the details. Now we want to view it and see how it looks, but first let's check our viewport render settings. If you use my startup file, you should have the same values and we should be fine. Let's make sure to save our file first and then go into render mode. This will probably take a while, especially the first time. Here you can run into 2 problems. The first can be that everything works, but Blender crashes while changing things in the rendering mode. If that happens, just open it up again and try to change things in solid view, and then check in the render view and change back to solid view to change more. The second problem you can have is that you ran out of GPU memory. For example, my GPU had some problems because I was also recording this video or this screen recording. So let's try to optimize our scene. Running out of VRAM is probably the first problem you will run into if you create complex scenes, and I always struggled with that. And no matter how much VRAM you have, you will always run into this problem, because yeah, it's just something we have to be cautious. So to optimize it, first of all, let's close any other program on your PC that is unnecessarily taking your computer resources. By the way, you can show how much resource a Blender scene takes by going into the Preferences and under Interface, under the status bar, select the Video and System Memory checkbox. And if you want to see how many vertices you have in the scene, select Scene Statistics. Now you can see it in the bottom right corner. The scene right now should also take up to 9 GB VRAM. But in case you only have an 8 GB VRAM card or lower, let's try to optimize it even more. Let's delete all the buildings you can see and rearrange them so it makes sense. With that, we reduce the amount of geometry, and we also already have 1K textures if you use the cargo assets, so we can't make that smaller without doing every texture manually, which would take hours, so no. Of course, you can make your city smaller and delete even more buildings, but I also don't want to do that, because then I have to change my whole scene. So the last thing, and I do most of the time, is just switch your rendering device to CPU right here in the render settings. This will take a bit longer to render, but at least you can display it, and it should work fine for most of the scenes. Also, for most things like the HDRI, we can also use the material preview mode. Just wait until all the shaders are compiled and then select scene light and scene world. Or another method just to view our HDRI in cycles is to just deactivate the city collection real quick and maybe activate the blockout collection. Now go into render mode again and it should work pretty easy. Of course you can't see all the buildings, but it's good enough to set up the HDRI. We can now change the HDRI easily with the HDRI add-on. We can rotate it to change from where the sun comes, and we can also tint it or change the color or adjust the strength. For now, we will only play around with the rotation until I like it. You can see that our shot can look very different by just rotating the HDRI. We will probably also change it later in the course, so let's leave it like this, even if we're not completely satisfied yet. Let's move on. Next, we want to adjust the materials for the city and fine-tune the look. For example, I don't like this red vibrant material and it doesn't fit with the mood board colors. So let's go into the shading tab. Now just select the building and let's find the red material. Once you found it, we can add a hue saturation node in between the image texture and the base color. Let's turn the saturation a little bit down. Let's do the same process to all the other colors we don't like, and this is really up to personal preferences. I also would recommend to use the material preview mode for this with Eevee because it's just way faster. As we already discussed in the first episode, it helps to establish a color palette in your reference board and stick with that. For the next part, we will turn our attention to the foreground and create it, and even do some modeling. For that, let's go back to the layout space and hide the city and the foreground collection. Then let's add in a plane, go into edit mode and the top view, and let's scale it on the y-axis. Then press the I key on the keyboard and slide it a bit inwards. With the inside face selected, let's extrude it upwards with the key E a little bit. Then press I again and move it in just a tiny bit and extrude also a tiny bit down again, so we can create this bevel. What we're doing now is just create one window of this building we want to have on top. Now let's extrude the bottom edges and then select the new face and extrude it upwards too. Now we have created our basic window. Let's go to the modifier tabs and add an array modifier with a count of 20 and duplicate it. On the modifier we just duplicated, let's change the x factor to 0 and the y factor to 1. Now we have this whole skyscraper looking window front. Let's change the original a bit in the editing mode so it has a little bit less space in between. Perfect. Now let's add it to the foreground collection and let's rotate the window front so that it looks downwards. And let's move it in place and hide the blockout. The next step is to texture it. For that, go to the shading space and let's create two new materials. Let's call the top one glass and the bottom one steel. In the glass material, in the principal BSDF node, let's turn the roughness to 0 and the transmission to 1. On the steel texture, let's turn the metallic to 1 and change the color to dark gray. Okay, so now only the glass material is applied and the bottom material, like the steel material, doesn't do anything. So to apply the different materials to different faces, so let's go into editing mode and select all the faces with the A key, and on the steel material, click Assign. Then only select the middle big face where we want to apply the glass material and click Assign. It should then look like this. Let's fine-tune the glass material, let's make it darker and make it 25% transparent with the alpha slider set to 0.75. And next we want to add some imperfections. For that we use some free surface imperfection textures from Action VFX. You can also find the download link attached to this video. So let's use this texture right here. You can just drag it into the shading space and then plug the image texture into the roughness and add a color ramp in between. Go to the top view and in edit mode with only the middle face selected, with F3 search for project from view and press enter. Now in the UV editor at the top left, select the texture we just imported. While still in edit mode with the face selected, you should see it on the texture. Rotate it and scale it until it fits the window, and now we have some beautiful imperfections. You can adjust them with the color ramp and make them stronger or less strong by adjusting the color of the white slider. By the way, if you also want the glass to look good in the material preview or use the material preview for adjusting the glass, now it looks weird. So in your render engine, switch to Eevee real quick and select screen space reflection and also activate refraction, and then go to the material itself and activate screen space refraction and put the blend mode to alpha blend. Then switch back to cycles. Now we change the material preview settings. Let's switch back to the layout workspace and duplicate the glass wall and rotate it to create like a corner of a building. Then let's add in a new plane, scale and rotate it that it looks like the building floor. Apply rotation and scale and then add an array modifier with a constant offset of minus 3.87 meters. So it exactly fits the floors of the building, of like the glass spacing. In the end, it should look like this. Go back into the shading tab and give it a gray material. So now if you take another look at the glass, it is a little bit too much see-through and we want some more reflection. So let's turn metallic to 1 and alpha to 0.9 and the color to a normal gray. Let's also bring the city back for better reference for the reflections and everything. Okay, I'm pretty pleased with that look. The only thing I want to change is to lower the alpha again to 0.85, but besides that, I think it looks good. After a quick check of the reflections, you can see the HDRI below the city, right here. So let's add a quick floor, because that isn't realistic. We can just copy the floor from this building and move it in place, and here we go. I'm pretty pleased with this look, and we went from just a few blocks to an actual city and a floating skyscraper in the foreground. In the next episode, we will add the character and also start on the animation. This includes like the whole glass breaking and everything. In this episode, we already made some big progress, and the next one is also gonna be a cool one. So yes, definitely come back for that and see you there in the 4th episode. We have already made great progress and I'm so glad that you're still with me until this point. Big congrats to you, and I'm so excited to see all of your guys' final animations on Instagram. In this episode, we will import our character, create and animate all the glass shards in the foreground, and refine the camera animation. Let's get to it. I already created a character for you with animations, because to be honest with you, it's not my specialty to do characters, and it would have probably taken another 2 episodes, but I still want to quickly show how I made it. The model is from MetaHuman I created a while back, but it has no hair and the face looks trashy. It still works though, because we don't need the face anyways and we can cover the head with a hood. After I imported it, I animated it by hand because most of it is slow motion. So basically, I just had to put the character in place for the first shot, then set a keyframe and put it in place in the second shot, and then just slightly make it move during the second shot with another keyframe at the end. It took me probably 1 to 2 hours to animate because I was also not using a good rig, but yeah, as I already said, character is still something I'm learning to do right. I attached a Blender file with the character animation, so make sure to download the blend file. After that, go to our original project file and click on Append and append the character collection. Now you should have it in your scene. You can now move it in place with the empty. If something doesn't line up, you can also animate the empty, that it move in a similar place that I have, or if the scale doesn't fit, simply scale the empty. Next, let's fine tune the camera. Go to the first camera and to the animation space. You can see for the blockout we had just some simple linear animation. So first of all, select the keyframes in the graphs editor and then press T and click on Bezier. Now you can see it's way smoother, but it does not do what I want it to do. Also, we have a new perspective of the whole shot because we actually have the character there. So first of all, let's go to the first frame and reframe the shot with the first shot. I want to show the glass being shattered, so let's move the camera close to the glass. I use G to move it around, and then I use the fly mode to look at the character. Let's try something like this. I also deleted an unnecessary in-between keyframe, and then I changed the third to something like this. I had a problem that because our camera is sideways, it was really hard to get the rotation right. So I just used the location keyframes on the camera, added an empty to the camera and parented to the empty, and then I animated the rotation on the empty, and it was way easier. I don't know really why, it has something to do with the rotation, but yeah, that's just an easy workaround. Next, I just slightly rotated the Bezier at the end of the X location to make it move a bit longer. And then I move this keyframe to 27 and the same on the rotation empty. Let's keep it like that for now and focus on the really important part, the glass destruction. Depending on how that looks, we will adjust the camera again later, but let's do the glass first. What I always recommend is to save a few incremental files. What that does is it just makes a copy of the file, so if you mess up the current one, you have a backup. Just make sure to delete the incrementals in the end if you don't use them, because they can take up lots of space. Another thing I like to do is to create a new collection and call it save. Then I completely hide the collection, but now whenever I make a change I can't undo later, I duplicate the object and put it into the save collection. This helps me because when I do such a change, like applying the array modifier, I still have a backup in the save collection if I need it later. So let's do that and duplicate the window front and put the duplicated object in the save collection. On the remaining glass front, we want to apply the array modifier so we can work with it. Next, go into edit mode and go into X-ray mode. Then make sure to go into the camera view and then you can just select all the visible faces just in the camera view. And now if you go out of the camera view, it should look something like this. Then go to the first shot and make sure you also select everything there. So like every selected face should be visible in the camera and there should be none face visible that is not selected. Then you can go into the bottom view and also select like a few more faces just to have like a margin, and then press Ctrl I to invert the selection. And now delete this by pressing the delete key and now select vertices. And with that we just deleted everything the camera can see anyways, because we don't want to do cell fractures or particles that take huge amount of computer resources on stuff we don't even see in the camera. But yeah, just make sure that you're fully zoomed out and that in the camera view you only see the window that is still there and you don't cut everything out that is visible in the camera. But yes, that's just to spare some resources. Now we want to separate like the windows from the metal beams in between. And with the model or window front selected and still in edit mode, select the big window face and then search for select similar area and press enter. Now we have selected all the window faces. Let's delete them and then outside of edit mode add in a new plane and move it where the windows were. Also give it the window material. The reason why we do this is because we only want to shatter the glass and not the metal beams in between. Now it should look the same as before. We can check it by quickly unhiding the save collection. Subdivide the plane with 100 cuts and right click and subdivide it again. Then outside of the edit mode, add a solidify with 0.002 and an offset to 1, so it's upwards. Then apply it. Now search for the cell fracture and press enter. In the new window, make sure to put the source limit to 1000 and the noise to 1. Also give the collection a name like cells. Press OK and let it do its thing. This can take a while. When it's finished, put the collection into the foreground collection and hide the original plane. Now select the cells around the character and just do another cell fracture with the same settings. Then select a cell even closer to the character and do it again so the cell gets smaller and smaller the closer they get to the character. Also make sure to delete the initial shell you did another cell fracture on so there are no duplicates. Next, let's select all cells by right clicking the collection and click on select objects. Then let's go to frame 1 and add a rotation and location keyframe. Then go to frame 80, select a cell under the character and activate proportional editing with a sharp fall off. Deactivate the character collection to not affect it, and after that drag it down on the Z axis and scroll to affect more. First try to affect all of them, but just slightly. Then let it go and drag it down again, but only affect half and let go again. Drag down again, now only affect the small cells right beneath the character to create like this mountain out of glass. After that, add another rotation and location keyframe to all the cells. Now we also want to give it some random rotation. So first select all the larger cells and search for randomized rotation. Then for the values, put in a light Z-axis value of 0.25 and rotation value of 10. Then select all the smaller cells and give them a random location of 2 on the z-axis and 360 degrees of random rotation. Select all the objects and add a keyframe again. You can also manually move cells around and give certain cells another random rotation value. Now bring the initial keyframe to frame 70, and if you play, it comes down with the character. Now let's tweak it by adjusting the position with the proportional editing tool, and maybe let's even refracture some of the bigger cells. This part is really up to you and how you want it to look. I like it more like this. When you dialed in your look, go to the last frame and select all the cells again. Randomize the transformation again, but this time just a tiny bit, and also move it a tiny bit down. Then put in a keyframe, and now you have some slowly moving particles. Now it looks already cool, but we are not finished yet. Let's put the 3D cursor on our guy so we don't have to always move the new objects up. Let's add in a new plane and scale it up. Now let's add a particle systems. By the way, if anything starts lagging, you can easily deactivate the collections we don't use right now, like the cells or the city. Okay, then on the particle system, set the frame start to 70 and the frame end to 75 and the lifetime to 150. Set the velocity to -7 so they quickly fall down. But now we also have to apply that slow motion effect to the particles. One way we can cheat it is with a really steady still wind. So let's add a wind. Go to frame 70 and put in a wind strength of 0 and keyframe it. Then go 10 frames forward and put in 25 for the strength and keyframe it again. Then go another 10 frames forward to frame 90 and put in a strength of 9.5 and keyframe it again. Now the only thing left is to go to the last keyframe and put it to 10 of the wind strength so it slows down a bit. And of course keyframe it again. If you now play it, it should pretty much move along the cells. Go to the particle settings again and under render select the cells collection. Under scale choose a randomness of 1 and then scale them between 0.05 and 0.1 depending on what you want it to look like. Also activate rotation and put all the sliders to the top so we have some random rotation. Now depending on your PC you can increase the amount of particles to something between 1000 and 10,000 particles. For me the particles started like 1 frame too early, so I just put the frame start and frame end 1 frame back. Then I bake the particles. If it's still off by 1 or 2 frames, it is easier to adjust the cells keyframe instead of the wind. Now the last thing is texturing. For the emitter create a new transparent material. Then select all the cells and shift click 1 and then add the window material to it. Then click on copy to select it so all the cells get the material. And here you go. Next let's go to our first shot. We also want the glass to be slightly animated and go slightly outwards in the first shot. So let's go to frame 20 and select the faces around the character. Then add a keyframe, go to frame 30 and randomize the transformation a bit. Then also pull it down just a tiny bit and add a keyframe for location and rotation. Now it should look like this. Then go to frame 71 and add a slight randomized transformation and pull it slightly and add a keyframe again, so we also get slight movement for the slow motion part. Now go to the character and go into pose mode on the amateur. In pose mode select all bones with A and keyframe at frame 20. And then go to frame 25 and just pull up the character slightly. Adjust his postures, legs and finger a bit so it looks like he is about to jump off. Then keyframe it again on frame 25. You might have to adjust or set keyframes for the hood because it's not parented to the head. Also attract the frame 20 and frame 25, keyframe 2 frames forward on the hood and the amateur. For the smaller particles, let's just duplicate the inner small cells and drag them down. Duplicate them a few more times so we have enough different particles and scale them down with individual origin so they all get smaller. Then move them in place and animate them like before with 2 keyframes. Now we have all the basic stuff and our 3D scene is nearly finished, but it still doesn't look really cool. So in the next episode, we will add all these final details and these final changes that will make it actually look cinematic and cool. So yes, see you there. Welcome to the 5th lesson. I'm really excited for this one because we have done all the heavy lifting and now we can add in all the final fun little details that will tie it all together. Let's begin with some principles. First of all, I like to add some clouds to my city. I keep the density low so it looks more like fog, but I think this really helps give the city some more depth. You can append the clouds from the SF file you already downloaded for the character. Just go to append again, select the file and then append the clouds collection. If your PC is already at its limit, you can also use images or video planes instead of volumetrics. And then just plug it into the base color and the emission and also in the alpha to make the black background transparent. But we will go with the real clouds. Next, we want to work on the lighting. This is really a preference and you can make it blue day like we have now or a foggy night, but I think I will go for something like golden hour. Another thing we can think about is if we want the sun in the background, because if we do, we can add some nice lens flare later, which can also make it cinematic too, or it's just another tool how you can like enhance your shot. But I think for this one, I want the sun to be on the left side. So later we can also work with some sun rays. I also put some clouds in the background because I think that looks cool. On these, I want to increase the density to 1, but to make sure not every other cloud gets affected too, go to this cloud symbol and click on the number to create a separate cloud, and then do the same on the material. And now you can increase the density. We also want to bring some clouds in the foreground so it really feels connected to the background and not just like a separate layer. Also, don't forget to select the clouds with the high density. By the way, if you don't use my Blender file template, make sure to set the volume step rate on the render tab to 100 and the max step of 128. You will not really see a difference, but it will become way faster. Next, let's use a different HDRI. I want one where the sun is bright, so I choose this one. Then I imported it into the Easy HDRI add-on and rotated it so the sun shines from the left. I also decreased the strength and saturation a bit, and I put the sun strength to 0.001. Next, let's change our color space to HEX under color management in the render tab, and the look to medium high contrast. Next, let's add some light rays. For that, add in a plane and then go to the shading space. With the plane still selected, press the key left to the number 1 key on your keyboard to only view this new plane. Then create a new material. Delete the principal BSDF and add in a transparent and an emission node material and mix it. Then add in a UV map node and separate XYZ node and a color ramp node. Plug the UV into the separate and then from the X into the color ramp, and then plug it into the mix shader factor. Make sure you're in cycles to see the changes. Then on the color ramp, select B-spline and add another black color stop to the middle. Now we have a nice fade off. To get the fade from the sides too, duplicate the color ramp and plug it into the Y of the separate XYZ node, and combine it with a multiply math node with the other color ramp. On the new color ramp, select Ease and put the black stop to the left and right. Let's also scale the bright side so it spreads out. If it now looks weird, just add some loop cuts. Now you can add more in the middle to give the light ray some more variation. Let's adjust the color of the emission texture and the strength. We can now control how much transparent it should be by changing the white color of the top slider. Let's move it in place of our scene. By the way, I learned this quick trick from Cartesian Caramel on YouTube. As you can see, the spread is a bit too much for the sun. That is so far away. So you can easily add in a new plane and apply the material and change the shape to something more realistic. I prefer also to just use a single white stop in the color ramp so it looks like one light ray, and then duplicate it to have multiple. Let's also add the color so it matches the lit clouds in the background. Now you can just duplicate and move them around until you like it. What I like to do is to have these light rays on a separate layer. So let's create a new layer and copy the settings and call it light rays. Then activate the holdout button and activate the holdout on everything and deactivate the cloud collection. Now in the render mode, you only see the light rays and the mask of the building in front of it. Let's keep that for now and let's switch back to our normal layer and let's name it main. Also make sure that under the view layer tab, the checkbox render single layer is ticked. The next thing to do is to activate the depth of field. Go to the camera and activate it. Then select our character for the focus distance. Because everything is a bit blurry in the preview of cycles, let's go to material preview mode and let's deactivate our clouds real quick. Now we can see it really well. Test it by setting the f-stop to 0.1. This is way too extreme, but you can see that everything in the background and the foreground gets a bit blurry. So let's do something realistic like 1.8. This is still low, but because the focus is far away from the character, it looks right to me. You can see it best if you zoom into the background and deactivate it and activate it again. Do the same for the camera of the first shot. Here, let's select the armature as a focus point and then select the right hand bone. Then here, let's do an f-stop of 2.4. You can see because the camera is closer, you can see the depth of field way better. Another method I often use if I want to change the focus dynamically or animate it is to add an empty and then select it as the focus object. So now I can animate the empty and the focus will also follow it. I did a quick test render and I really like it so far. By the way, ignore the artifacts in the background. We get rid of them by rendering the light rays separately. Here are the things I want to improve. The glass material is too dark and not enough reflective, and I want another cloud to the right side behind the first building. Let's put some clouds there real quick and check if it looks better. Yes, way better. In the end, it's just about filling up the empty spots to make it more detailed. Okay, let's go to the shading space and select the glass material and let's change the metallic to 0.5 so it's a bit more see-through. Because now, when it's shattered, it looks too much like metal. But I still want a bit metal because else it's not enough reflective. Let's also turn the alpha to 1. Maybe we will change it again after a test render, but let's keep it for now. Now let's do the test render. Set the quality to 50% and the samples to something like 16. Try GPU rendering. If it runs out of memory or crashes, try CPU. I also had to try CPU and it just takes a bit longer, but it works perfectly. Before rendering, save it and let's try to render a frame. It shouldn't take longer than 30 seconds. If so, try to set the samples even lower because this is really just a low preview test render. You want to reach a value of 5 to 30 seconds per frame for this test render. Set the start frame to 72 and the end frame to 192 and create an output folder. If you don't use my template file, make sure to check these settings. Set the file output to PNG, make sure the denoiser is active with OpenImage denoise selected. Make sure the noise threshold is activated with 0.01. Make sure you have a light bounce of 4 and also activated the motion blur and persistent data. Then render it. It's finished now for me, so let's take a look. I imported it into After Effects, but you can use whatever video editing software you want to use. Then let's import the PNG file as a sequence and make sure the frame rate is set correct. Let's take a look. Okay, there are a few things I want to change. In the foreground, I want to add some really small clouds right below the glass. I also want more and smaller glass particles. Then I have to check the timing again because the character goes off before the glass into slow motion, which looks a little bit weird. Then the background feels a bit disconnected and it could be just a still image. So I also want to animate a few things there, like the cloud movement and maybe a few other things. With that newly gained knowledge, let's go back to our Blender file. Let's select the character armature and go into pose mode. Select all bones with A and now we can move this keyframe to frame 84. Now it looks better. Go out of pose mode and select the particle system. This now depends on your PC, but if your PC can handle it, put the number to 10,000 or even more, and the scale to 0.075. Again, this is also preference, so you can also choose different settings. And let's bake it again, of course. Let's save an incremental backup. I also slightly changed the timing, and I have now a start frame of 71 and an end frame of 78 on the particles. I also turned the velocity to 6 instead of 7, and on the wind I turned down the middle keyframe to 22.5. Now it looks a bit better in my opinion. Then also bake it again, of course. After that I put 2 small clouds in the foreground. I also put one right here to the right side. Now let's select all clouds in the background and let's add a location keyframe to them. And then let's go to the first frame and move them just a tiny bit. Don't do it too much because it will look weird. Just move them a tiny bit to the left and add another one again. Then go to the animation space, select all the graphs with A and press T to switch to linear again. Let's do the same for the foreground clouds, but a bit less movements. You can also use a slight random transform on the y-axis of 10 meters and then keyframe again on the last frame to not have them all move at the same speed. Then another small detail we can do, but only if your PC can handle it, is to create an instance with Alt-D of these buildings and just put them below or short so they have a bit more to reflect. Then on the low dense cloud, I put the density from 0.1 to 0.25. The last thing we will do is to add some simple bird effects. Add a cube and roughly shape it like a bird. In edit mode, add 2 planes as wings and then put the wings in a downwards position. Add a shape key. Then add another shape key and put the wings up in edit mode. Now animate a second shape key so it goes up and down. Make sure it's really slow because remember, we are in slow motion. Add a cycles modifier in the graphs editor, so it repeats the motion over and over again. Add a solidify with 0.5 and a subdivision modifier with 1. And this can really look funny because it doesn't really matter because it's so far in the distance. And you don't really need a subdivision modifier if your PC is already at the limit. Add a black material with a roughness to 1 and duplicate the birds 5 times and offset the animation. Then put them all in a collection and let's call it bird and put them out of the way. Add in a plane and add a particle system. Set the number to 25 and the start frame from 0 to 90. Make the lifetime 200 and under source the jittering to 2. Then under velocity, make it 1 on the y-axis and 3 on the z-axis. And under field weights, turn the gravity and wind to 0. Then bake it. Now we have some extra details. You can duplicate it and also duplicate the particle system by clicking on the number 2, so we have a separate particle system and they're not linked. And then adjust it, add some more birds, like change the particle start and end, so we can just add some birds all over the scenes. You can also use a negative value from the start frame, so they're already in the air once the animation starts. For example, if you choose like -100 for the start frame, they will be up in the air when the frame starts, so they're not all just flying out of the buildings when the animation starts. But don't forget to increase the lifetime, so they don't just disappear. Now we're finally ready to render out our final animation. I will do a low-res test render with the same settings as before to see if everything still works out. Maybe the birds are a little bit too fast or the clouds are a little bit too fast, so I would suggest to do that first so you don't render it high quality and after many hours you see that something is wrong. So just like double check everything and maybe render a low-res again. If everything worked out in the test render, I would suggest to use these settings, and these are also the settings I use to render my animation. Use sample of 64, then the open image denoise, and also change the light bounce to 4. It is already like that if you have my startup file, and then set the volume step rate to 100 with 128 max steps, then turn the motion blur on and check the persistent data. Double check you still have the HEX color space selected with medium contrast as color management. And if you have the power, you can render it at 4K. But because I have to render on CPU, I leave it at Full HD because it would take way too long. and I only wanted to render like over the next 8 hours overnight. By the way, if you have some spare resources on your PC, I would first increase to 4K res, and then if you still have even more power, you can also increase the samples. I just found out that if you first increase the resolution, the denoiser gets way better and you have better results and same render time than if you first start increasing the samples. By the way, I have created a checklist with everything which you can also find attached, which I use in every project to make sure I did not forget something. Definitely check it out and feel free to make a copy of it and use it for yourself. Or also extend it with your own stuff. For me, the render takes around 10 hours. So I will render it overnight. I just rendered one frame and then I multiplied the time it took with the frame range we have. For example, now it's 192, and with that I had my end time, how long it takes, which was around 10 hours for me, so I will render it overnight. Do all the same for the first shot and render it out too. Don't forget for the first shot to set the frame range from 1 to 75. I also added some small details, like I added some small mini clouds to the first shot as well, just to create like some more depth on the foreground and some small details because it's more zoomed in than the second shot. But yes, this is again really up to you how you want to make it and how you want to create this scene. Let's also not forget our light rays. So for that, just switch to the light rays layer and make sure that all the collections are on holdout, and to deactivate all the collections with clouds in it, and then except for the light rays collection, of course. Then also switch to transparent in the render settings under film, and in the output settings switch from RGBA to only RGB because I want a black background. Then also put the bursts we just created, like the particle systems, into collection and also activate the holdout. Now when you render it, you should only see the light rays and the masks in front of them. So when we have that, we can also render out the light rays. For these, you can use really low quality settings. Make sure it's also full HD and set the samples maybe to 16 or even lower. And yeah, check out for yourself what looks best, but this doesn't has to be high quality. And then also set the frame range from 72 to 192 again, and then render it out for the second shot too. You can do it also for the first shot if you want to have the light rays in the first shot too. So yes, make sure to do that too so we can work with them in post-processing. In the next episode, I will show you how you can easily add some variations and do some changes so you can get your own unique animation. I will show you how you can quickly like turn it into a desert scene or a snowy landscape with a mountain in the background, or even some fire and explosion action at night. And yes, we will go over that quickly. And then of course, I will also show you the whole post-processing process I do. So yes, I'm looking forward to that and see you there. Welcome to episode 6. We are already at the end, and this is the last episode where we'll finish everything and you should have everything rendered out by now, so we can do another very important step, the whole post-processing. But before that, I just want to quickly show how I made these 3 variations with the sand, the snow, and the fire. And yes, just to inspire you how you can vary your own animation and create your own unique style and your own unique animation in the end after the course. So for these variations, you can really go crazy. You can change so many things. So I tried to create like a big variation with just a few small changes. So it's not really much work to do. So that was like my goal for it. But of course you can like go even further and change the building and everything. So first of all, I want to give you a quick overview on how I created the sand variation, like this desert one. First of all, I hid all the clouds because they didn't fit the theme. Then I just scaled the cube and gave it a principal volume material to create some fog, and I turned the density down. Then I tinted it orange to get like this Blade Runner desert effect, and I added a gradient texture to make it more dense at the bottom. For inspiration, as I already told, I took this desert scene from Blade Runner. Then I added a quick particle system to simulate some sand and dirt flying around. And with that, it already looked way different. Then for the snow landscape, I also hid the clouds and I used a simple geometry setup to create some snow on top of the building. I attached a YouTube tutorial which I used, so you can replicate it if you want. Then I also added some white fog and another snow particle system with low gravity and some wind and turbulence to simulate some snow. I also added in some free assets like some ice walls and a mountain in the back. So yes, and with that we also had the snow variation. The last one I did is the fire one. For that I turned the HDRI strength down so it's night, and I added some fire VDBs I created myself in Embergen. For that you can also use your own VDBs, but I also put the VDB sequence I used into the asset file, so you can also append the explosion and fire collection from the asset file there, that you can use it in your own scene too if you want to. So that's another asset you can use for free. And yes, I really want to encourage you to create your own variation, maybe add some trees and grass everywhere, make it a green landscape, or make it a cyberpunk night city by adding some neon lights. So yeah, there are really thousands of options, so just try to come up with your own creative ideas. Now let's get to the post-processing. Import your footage into a compositing or editing software of your choice. I will use After Effects, but if you don't have that, feel free to follow along with your own editing tool. I won't make really complex stuff and focus more on the principles behind it, so it doesn't really matter if you're following along in After Effects or use a free alternative. Let's import our PNG sequence by double-clicking right here and then select PNG and click on the PNG sequence. Make sure it imports with 24 FPS. If not, you can change it by right-clicking on it and click on Interpreting Footage and then Media and then change it here. Then drag the clip on top of this icon to create a composition. Bring in the first shot the same way and drag the second a little bit back, so we have first the first shot and then it cuts to the second shot. Let's also change the composition length because it just took the first clip, and because we now have 2 clips, we want to make it a little bit longer, and let's set it to 8 seconds. Okay, just trim the last few frames of the first shot and the first few frames of the second shot so they just match better together, and let's play it back and see if our cut works. Okay, next let's add an adjustment layer by right clicking and then under new add the adjustment layer. Let's add a grain effect and a lumetric color effect. In the grain, select final output and decrease the intensity to 0.25 and the size to 0.5. Then in the lumetric color effect, I just want to do some color grading, and this also really depends on your taste. So you can choose your own values, but I show you what I did. I turned the exposure up a bit and also the highlights and shadows and whites. Then I added a vignette of -3 to bring the focus more to the middle and away from the corners. I also like to add a Gaussian blur with 2 on top, which just gives it a little bit more of a realistic feels, because CGI renders can just look too sharp and too perfect, and we want like this realistic camera feel. Then add the CC lens effect to give it some artificial lens distortion, and turn the signs to 500 and the convergence to 50. I also use this quick chromatic aberration effect to give it some chromatic aberration. I also attached a download link to this effect. What I like to do next is to add some lens dirt. For that, select both shots and pre-compose them. Let's call it footage. Then duplicate them with Ctrl D and pre-compose the top again and call it lens dirt. For that, I use some free lens dirt textures from Action VFX. I also attached the download link. Import 1 or 2 of your desired lens dirt textures and drag them into the timeline. Then on the top footage, add a lumetric color and turn the saturation to 50. And after that, in the curve, grab the bottom pin and drag it over until the bright parts are visible. And do the same for the top, so we really only have the bright spot. Then add a box blur and blur it. Use the footage layer now as a mask for the lens dirt. Do the same for the second texture. Now back in the main composition, change the blending mode to screen, and here you go. You can also add a brightness node and make it more visible and brighter. If you want to get rid of certain colors, you can just go to the adjustment layer and under the HSL secondary select the color you want. Adjust the selection with the sliders and blur it a bit. Then under correction, turn down the saturation. This can help to guide it further and really art direct what kind of color you want to have in there, or if you forgot to take out a certain color in the render and it just like disturbs the final image or the final look. Now we can also add some overlay, like a slight fog overlay or whatever, but I will keep it as it is. Next, let's import our light trace layer the same way we did before, the other, like the footage, and put it on top right beneath the adjustment layer. Now let's just align it with the second shot, and also if you want, you can also, like if you render it out for the first shot too, do the same for the first shot. And then let's just switch the blending mode to screen, and it should already work, and it also should already be masked because we had like these holdout buildings in front of it. So yes, then you can also like adjust the brightness or the opacity here to make them more, to give them more strength or less strength. And yes, that's basically it. So let's send it to Adobe Media Encoder and render it out. And yes, with that, we are finished with our animation. You can also download the finished project file that I created in case you want to take a look at stuff that I did, and I also uploaded project files of the variation. And yes, feel free to use them. And with that, we're already at the end, but we have one more episode, like the last episode, in that I will just talk a little bit about my journey and how I got into 3D, and especially like on the business part, like how I made my first money and how I attracted my first client. And I will also give some tips to you how you can attract your first client too. And yes, I will just talk about it for a few minutes. And yes, make sure to watch that too if you're interested in that. And yes, with that, thank you so much for taking my course, for buying it and just investing time, and I hope you could learn many new things. And also make sure to, if you upload the animation on YouTube or Instagram, make sure to tag me, and yes, then I will definitely repost it and share it to my followers so they can see what you created. And yes, thank you so much for tuning in, and I wish you all a great week, and yes, see you in the next and last episode. Welcome to this last episode of the course. In this last episode, I want to take the chance and tell you a little bit about my story and how I got into freelancing in 3D, like from just a hobby into a part-time job now and eventually a full-time job. And yes, I just want to share some tips and tricks I learned along the last 3 or 4 years. Let's start with my story. I started around 5 or 6 years ago when I bought my first like real camera. It was, I believe, a Sony Alpha 6300. But yeah, however, I just started filming, started taking some photos, and then eventually I got a little bit into VFX, but just really simple stuff like some 2D effects, some overlay, like everything done in Premiere Pro. Then I also started learning After Effects a bit, which is like better for doing visual effects, but it was still like on a 2D basis, or maybe really some basic 3D in After Effects, but not actually 3D, like maybe just some tracking, or maybe some, like I did some video co-pilot tutorials. And yeah, then I realized if I want to do like more complicated and more like cooler VFX shots, I have to learn 3D at some point. So I Googled which was a good 3D software, and I stumbled upon Blender, obviously, because also it was free. So I thought, let's try it out. And I did a donut tutorial from Blender Guru. And yes, that's my first contact with Blender. I believe this was like 4 or 4.5 years ago, or 5, I'm not sure. But yes, it was a long time ago. And from there, I picked it up from now and then, maybe every few weeks. I tried some VJ stuff, did some Docky 3D tutorials, but also mainly used it from some really bad visual effects shot. I tried to find them, and I can show them right now exclusively to you because I think I've never showed them, but they're really funny because they're so bad. But yes, it's probably interesting to see my first visual effects shots. But yes, however, I spent lots of my free times gaming, like at the PC. And I think it was like 2020, summer of 2020, I just wanted to start like a new hobby, and instead of gaming, just maybe do some more creative stuff. And then when it came back to mind that I learned 3D a few months back, so I picked it up again and started doing it like really as a full-time hobby. I like as a motivation for me, I also started a new Instagram channel, the one I have now, and that was like 3.5 years ago. And yes, I just started to create 3D animations regularly and started creating my portfolio. What's maybe also important that in this year where I started like 3D as a full-time hobby, I was still in my fourth year of my IT apprenticeship. But I also knew that I did not want to continue working in IT because it was like too technical for me and I wanted to do something more creative as a job. So like 3D was a really like promising opportunity. I always knew before that maybe I want to like become a filmmaker or a visual effects artist, but once I started like 3D more serious and started creating my first full 3D scenes, I just like really fell in love with it because you can create like anything you can imagine, which is such a cool concept. So at that point, I didn't do anything for money. It was just like my personal projects. But then a friend I knew from a few years back reached out because he saw my Instagram posts, like my 3D posts. And he said that they're actually just started a new studio and they're also doing some 3D stuff. And if I want to come by and visit their studio. As I said, they also just discovered 3D, but because they had the studio for a few months and also were before like did some paid projects, they had like way more experience and connections than me. Because like as I already said, I've never done the paid project for 3D. So a few weeks passed, I visited their studio and connected and networked, and then like I had my first project. It was actually like 2D animation in After Effects, but still it was a really cool moment. And the studio, it was like a project from the studio and I just helped them animate some stuff. So yes, that was a really cool opportunity. And from then on, I also got like a few smaller projects via Instagram for some really small clothing brands on, and it was also like some simple animations and nothing complicated, and it also wasn't really expensive and I didn't make a lot of money, but I also did not have to because I was still in my apprenticeship and I still did everything like in my free time. So yeah, it was just to build my portfolio and get some new connections. So then I just built my portfolio, enhanced my skill, and with every animation I tried to learn something new, or with every render, and did some more projects. So I think about a year ago in winter of 2022, January 2023, I had some viral reels, which also really helped me, but not in the way you think. So the funny thing is, I don't really get more project requests on Instagram since I have like 70,000 followers than before when I had like 800 followers. So that's actually interesting. But what it helps is if I like write to brands, or if I ask for, or like if I ask someone if they could use my work, I can just like attach my Instagram channel and it's a really nice portfolio because I have like organized my feed that you see everything I've done. And yes, so for that, that also helps. So 1.5 years ago, I reduced my IT job from 5 days a week to 4 days a week. So I had like one extra day, and this summer I reduced it to 3 days a week. So I have like 2 full days now I can work on 3D project, but that also means I need consistent 3D projects now. So I also reach out to clients. For example, the Tommy Profit visualizer did. I just filled out the contact form on his website and told him my idea I had, and it actually worked. He responded and I got the project. And yes, that brings us to today. So why am I telling you this? I hope I did not bore you, but first of all, I want to inspire you. Most of you probably know me from a few thousand followers. Maybe you started following at 20,000, maybe at 30, maybe at 50, maybe just now at 70,000. But I also started with 0 followers. I actually like grinded follower by follower from 0 followers to I think about 900 followers over the course of 2.5 years. And only like a year ago, I started gaining like new followers. But I just want to encourage you, just stick to what you do, try out new things, and you can definitely do it in the industry. And you don't need many followers. You really don't. Like I did one of my favorite projects, the visualizer for Marshmallow, when I only had, I think about 400 or 500 followers. So yes, it's really all about networking. But the second reason was I just want to show you like what I learned all over these years and show you my key takeaways from this story and share these tips and tricks. So it's just like a foundation for the coming tips and tricks. So let's start with the first tip. This is a really important one, and I call it improve your skill. So I really want to suggest to you, take a year or maybe more, but just improve your skill in Blender or whatever 3D software and compositing software, and yeah, just try to learn new things, practice daily or at least weekly, and just become good at what you do, because no one wants to hire a beginner. So if you have like a solid portfolio and if you have like a good skill, you're immediately more likely to get your first client. Plus, the better you get at it, the faster you can create something, which is again great because then you can make more profit and like improve your income from 3D. So the second one is to build your portfolio. So I did this in my first year of doing 3D. Like when I practice daily, I just focus on personal projects and just putting them out there. I really want to encourage you, post your stuff on Instagram or ArtStation, or you can also create your own website, but just post it somewhere. And it doesn't really matter if it's bad yet, because then once you get good and post everything, a client can like see, okay, he started there for a year ago where it wasn't that good, but now he progressed so far, which like encourages him, because he knows if he also want to work with you in the future, you are a fast learner and can improve your skills. So that's a really important thing. And also, obviously, a portfolio is everything in this industry, because like clients want to see what you can do, what you have done in the past. And yes, that's really important. So first, build your portfolio with personal projects in the first year or 2 years, however much time you spend daily on Blender. And yes, just focus on that in the beginning. Then the third method is to connect with other artists. Try to connect with other artists or studios in your country or city if you live in a big city. And yes, just try to connect with them, maybe write them on Instagram, maybe if you can meet up or maybe visit their workplace, because this just works so well, because maybe they're a little bit further in the journey of making money and having clients and they can help you out, or maybe they have like too many projects and you can help them. So it's really a win-win situation. And that was also the case for me. Like I already told you in my story, when my friend wrote me if I want to visit his studios, and this really helped me, like as a complete beginner or newbie in the industry, to get my first project. So I really can recommend that. Try to network as much as possible. It probably works best to connect like with other local artists, because you can meet them in real life, and it's also like another layer to it if you can meet them in real life. But if you don't have that in your city or even in your country, then of course you can also like meet maybe on Discord or Instagram, and yeah, just write them if you have any projects you don't want to do, I will be here to do them for you for a commission, something like that. But yes, with that you can also then build like your paid project portfolio, or I don't know how you want to call it, but just like build your portfolio with your first paid projects and your actual work in the industry. But yeah, also connect with artists that maybe are also just a beginner, because maybe in the future when you got your first client, he maybe also got his first client, and then you can also share them, or yeah, whatever. Just try to connect and network as much as possible. So the fourth method is to reach out to clients directly. Of course, if you just started out, you probably shouldn't reach out to big companies like Netflix or whatever, but maybe start with smaller brands. Maybe you have a local clothing brand or a local music artist that could use your visualizer, but just like do some market research, look who's a potential client for you, and then just write an email to them, write a DM. You can really lose nothing, and you can always ask, and the worst that can happen is no, but you already have a no if you don't ask. So just reach out and ask them, but also do it in a good way. Don't just write them one phrase, but like tell them your idea, tell them the potential you see, and yeah, you always want to make them clear what they will gain if they work with you, what their win is, and yes, then just reach out to them. And yeah, that's actually like how I already told, I got my recent project for Tommy Profit. And yeah, I just like I DM'd him and he didn't respond, so I filled out the contact form in his website, and yes, it actually worked. I told him that I saw that on his YouTube channel he always uploads the cover to the song, and I could do like a cool visualizer, which would not be as expensive as a full-blown music video, but still way better than a cover. And yes, he really liked it, so I got the project. And yeah, just try, analyze other businesses or artists and if they could use your services, and reach out to them with a properly written text. Once you got your first client, you have to get into pricing. And I actually got a few questions about this, so I will also include it in this course a bit. And I think I never talked about it this detailed on Instagram or YouTube. So yes, this is exclusively for you. So first of all, the goal is to not sell your service for too cheap, because then you can't stay in business if you sell yourself too cheap. But you also don't want to get extremely expensive, because then you won't find any clients. In the end, the client will pay you as much as you're worth it to him. So you want to sell yourself and your service as good as possible. And of course, create your own pricing system that is fair. So here are a few methods. The first one is to charge per hour. This is probably the easiest, and it's no risk and it's really easy to calculate. Just agree on an hourly rate with the client, and then you just have to track your hours. Probably try to Google like similar rates from your country. If there's nothing online from other 3D artists, maybe see what a videographer charges for his service, and yes, just like charge a similar amount. But this is really like based on your location, your country, and your currency, and many other things. So there's not really a right and wrong there. But yeah, so the problem with hourly rates though is, despite it being really easy, it's not the best for you or the client. But the big disadvantage here is that if you become better and actually get faster, you can charge less, which shouldn't be a thing. And for the client, it's also not good, because most clients value time. So it's a good thing for them if they get something fast. So you want to like reward yourself if you're fast with a project, and it's also worth to the client if you're faster and is willing to pay more, most likely. So I think this method might be a good way to start out if you have really no experience and you don't want to get too deep into pricing, or you're not really like secure yet. But I just want to encourage you, after a while, make sure to switch on to another method. So another method, and the method I use the most, is to charge per project. In this method, you create a fixed price estimate for the whole project. And this is based on your experience, on your skill, on the project size, of course, like how long you estimate it takes. So you still like can use the hours as a reference, but you don't like communicate it to the client. And of course also for the client itself, like if it's a really big company that uses your video all over the world, like you have to charge more than if it's just a local shop in your city, even though it takes you the same amount of time. As I already said in the beginning, it really helps to calculate your price if you track your time. Track your time to get better at estimating how long a project will take, because you also don't want to set the price too low and then you spend like hundreds of hours on it and then make a negative amount of money. So yes, you really don't want to do that. So it's a little bit more risk than the hourly base, because if you like spend too long on it, you won't make big profits. But yes, that's why it's really important to track your time to get better at estimating how long something takes. But for the client, this is a way safer and more interesting method, because he knows a fixed price, and if he doesn't do like additional changes, like you can charge more for additional changes or additional hours if you have too much changes or want more aspect ratios or whatever. Make sure to not include that in the fixed price, but to do like fix another price if he wants like maybe, for example, include like 1 or 2 changes, and if it goes over that, you will just charge him like such and such an amount hourly for the additional changes. Or if you agree on a landscaped aspect ratio and he suddenly wants a real TikTok aspect ratio, then you can also charge like a certain amount more for that. So yes, make sure to also not include everything in the fixed price, but just like the base project. Then of course you can also include stuff like licensing, especially for bigger clients. You should make sure that if they say they use it only for one marketing campaign, that they actually only use it for one marketing campaign. And if they want to use it for another next year, that they have to pay you again. Yeah, that's also just an important thing to include maybe in your contract, because I think that's just fair. If like a company hires you to do something for just this collection and then suddenly use your clip all over the world, yes, it's really cool for you because it's big exposure, but it's also just fair if they pay you a little bit more. So yes, make sure to also think about that. So then the third thing is subscription based. So this is a really interesting concept. It's great because you can create like a fixed income because they pay every month, and you get a way better relationship with the client, which is something that is always good. But in my experience, it's kind of hard to implement in 3D. This is, for example, something that works perfect for social media or for a marketing guy, because that's something that you create daily. Like you create daily stories, you might create weekly posts, so you can perfectly charge that on a monthly basis. But for 3D, it might be that it's just a one-time project, so then this method isn't good. But if you maybe have a clothing brand that needs 3D mockups every week, you can really charge them monthly a fixed price and then just provide them everything they need in this month, like of course until like a certain limitation. But yes, that's also a method that's really interesting to explore, maybe especially if you're more advanced in this area. I hope these tips and tricks are just a good starting point on your journey to earn your first money or get your first client with Blender. Again, I didn't really mention like the amount because that's really hard, because it's a totally different amount if you live in the US or if you live in India or if you live somewhere in Europe or Africa, and this really depends on your economy. So I just want to encourage, try to Google how much maybe another company in your country charges on an hourly rate, or like ask other people or maybe other artists you connected how much they charge. And yes, you can always ask. If they don't want to answer, it's also fine, but yes, just make sure to ask other people. Or also you can also think about how much do you have to make, so you can make some profit, and then also like make it a little bit more expensive. And yes, but in the end you also will find out if you're too expensive, if you get no clients, or if you get many client feedbacks that you're too expensive. But yes, just figure that out, and also take help from other artists or other like professions like a filmmaker. And yes, just compare the prices and see what works for you in your own country. And with that, we are already at the end of the course. I hope you had fun, but most importantly, I hope you could learn a lot new things and take your animations to the next level. Make sure to also check again all the free assets that come with the course. Maybe you want to download them and save them somewhere. And also make sure to post your artwork on Instagram so I can share it in my story and repost it and show it also to my follower what a great animation you did. I wish you all a great rest of the week, and I wish you much success in the future. Goodbye.